You're lying in bed right now, maybe scrolling, maybe staring at the ceiling, and somewhere in the back of your mind, there's this question you didn't know you had. Family Guy. That show you've seen 100 times, laughed at, quoted, maybe even got annoyed by. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Behind all those cutaway gags and chicken fights and Conway Twitty interruptions, there's death. A lot of it. More than you'd think for a cartoon about a fat guy in Rhode Island. And not just throwaway deaths either. Real ones. Emotional ones. Deaths that changed the show. That broke the internet. That made you feel something you weren't expecting to feel while watching Peter fall down and grab his knee. So let's do something different tonight. Let's walk through every single one of them. Slowly. Carefully. So get comfortable. Dim the lights if you want. Close your eyes when you're ready. We're starting at the beginning, or maybe the middle, because with Family Guy, it's hard to tell where anything really begins. The death that changed everything wasn't supposed to happen. That's the irony. It was planned, calculated, designed to shock, and yet when it aired in November 2013, it felt like a betrayal nobody saw coming. Brian Griffin, the talking dog, the voice of reason, the one character who seemed too important to touch, got hit by a car. Just like that. No warning. No slow build. 1 minute he's playing street hockey with Stewie. The next he's lying in the street, broken. And you can hear Stewie's voice crack in a way you'd never heard before. The episode is called Life of Brian, and it opens like any other episode. Normal chaos. Normal gags. Peter does something stupid. Lois sighs. Meg exists in the background. Standard operating procedure. But then Stewie destroys his time machine, which in hindsight feels like the writers closing a door they knew they'd need closed. No easy outs. No do-overs. And then Brian steps into the street to retrieve a ball and a car comes out of nowhere, and the sound it makes when it hits him is wrong. Too real. Too sharp. Family Guy has always played with tone, switching from silly to dark in a heartbeat, but this was different. This lingered. They take him to the veterinarian, and the whole family is there, and you realize how rarely you see all of them in one room being genuinely vulnerable. The vet says there's internal bleeding, that there's nothing they can do, and Brian asks to see the family one more time. He tells each of them something. He tells Meg she's going to be fine. He tells Chris to keep being weird. He tells Peter he's his best friend. And then he looks at Stewie and says, "You've given me a wonderful life." And you can hear people watching this at home thinking, what the hell is happening right now? This is Family Guy. This is the show where Peter fights a chicken for 6 minutes straight, where Quagmire says giggity, where nothing is supposed to matter. And yet here we are, watching a dog die in a cartoon, and it feels like losing someone real. The backlash was immediate. Social media exploded. Petitions were started. Hashtags trended. People were furious, heartbroken, confused. Why would they do this? Brian wasn't just a character. He was the moral center of the show, the one who called out Peter's idiocy, who had real conversations with Stewie, who grounded the absurdity in something resembling reality. Without him, what was the show? The writers replaced him with Vinny, a new dog with an Italian accent voiced by Tony Sirico, and while Vinny was fine, he wasn't Brian. He couldn't be. The whole thing felt wrong, like wearing someone else's shoes, and the show knew it. You could feel it in the episodes that followed. There was a hollowness, a missing piece that no amount of jokes could fill. Brian's death wasn't just a plot point. It was a statement. It said, nothing is safe. It said we can do whatever we want. It said this show has been on for over a decade, and maybe we need to remind you that we're still capable of surprising you. Except it didn't quite land that way. Instead of feeling daring, it felt cruel. Instead of feeling shocking, it felt manipulative. Because 2 episodes later, Stewie finds his time travel return pad in Brian's personal effects, fixes it, goes back in time, and saves Brian's life. And just like that, the death was undone. Brian was back. Vinny was gone. The universe reset. And the whole thing felt less like a bold creative choice and more like a publicity stunt. A way to get people talking. A way to trend on Twitter. A way to remind everyone that Family Guy still mattered. But here's the thing about that death. Even though it was reversed, even though Brian came back and everything went back to normal, it left a mark. It changed how people watched the show. It introduced the idea that major characters could actually die, that the show could commit to something permanent, even if it ultimately didn't. And it raised questions about what death means in a show like this. Family Guy operates in a weird space where continuity barely exists, where episodes reset at the end, where characters get maimed and dismembered and blown up and they're fine by the next scene. Death is a punchline, a cutaway gag, a throwaway moment. Except when it's not. Except when the show decides to make you feel something. And Brian's death, temporary as it was, proved that even in this chaotic, consequence-free universe, death could still hurt. It could still matter. And that's a strange power for a cartoon to have. Before Brian, there was another death that shaped the show in quieter, more permanent ways. Francis Griffin, Peter's father, died in the season 5 episode Mother Tucker. And unlike Brian's death, there was no resurrection, no time travel fix, no fan outcry demanding he come back. Francis was gone, and he stayed gone, and his absence became a part of Peter's story in ways both explicit and unspoken. Francis was introduced early in the show as this hard, Catholic, old-school father figure who never quite approved of Peter, who saw his son as a disappointment, who represented everything Peter both feared and rebelled against. He was voiced by Charles Durning with this gruff, judgmental tone that made every scene he was in feel tense, like Peter was always one screw-up away from another lecture about shame and hellfire. The relationship between Peter and Francis was complicated in a way the show didn't always explore deeply, but was always there, simmering under the surface. Peter both craved his father's approval and resented him for never giving it. And when Francis died, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a big event episode. He just had a stroke and was gone. And the show dealt with it in the next episode, Peter's Two Dads, where Peter discovers that Francis might not have been his biological father after all. The death of Francis allowed the show to explore Peter's identity in ways it hadn't before. It opened up storylines about Peter's Irish heritage, his relationship with his mother Thelma, and his struggle with feeling unmoored from the man who defined so much of his worldview, even if that worldview was often toxic and suffocating. Francis was a representation of old-world masculinity, of religious guilt, of generational conflict, and his death marked a kind of freedom for Peter, but also a loss, because even a bad father is still a father. Even a relationship built on disappointment and judgment is still a relationship, and when it's gone, there's a hole. The show didn't dwell on this too much, because it's Family Guy and dwelling isn't really their thing, but you could feel it in certain episodes, in moments where Peter would reference his father or make a joke that had this undercurrent of unresolved pain. Francis's death was permanent, and that permanence gave it weight. It's said that in this universe, some things do end. Some people don't come back. And life just keeps going, messy and complicated and full of jokes that land a little differently when you remember what's been lost. Then there's Diane Simmons. And this one's fascinating because it represents the first time Family Guy tried to do a genuine murder mystery, the first time they committed to a storyline that took itself seriously for an entire episode and beyond. Diane was the longtime news anchor alongside Tom Tucker, voiced by Lansing Henriksen, and she'd been a recurring character since the show's early days, mostly as background color, a fixture in Quahog's media landscape. But in the season 9 episode, And Then There Were Fewer, she became something else entirely, a killer. The episode is an homage to Agatha Christie, specifically And Then There Were None, where a group of characters are invited to a mansion and start getting murdered one by one. It's darker than most Family Guy episodes, less joke-dense, more atmospheric. People actually die. James Woods gets shot. Priscilla, James Woods' girlfriend, gets killed. Stephanie, Tom Tucker's wife, is murdered. And slowly, through the episode, the group realizes that Diane is behind it all. Her motive is revenge. Years ago, James Woods promised to leave his girlfriend for Diane, but he didn't. And it ruined her career, her life, her sense of self. So she lured everyone to the mansion and started picking them off, methodically, coldly. And when she's finally revealed, she doesn't break down or apologize. She owns it. She's proud of it. The climax of the episode is a standoff on a cliff where Diane holds Lois at gunpoint, monologuing about her pain and her fury. And then Lois tricks her, and Diane falls backward off the cliff, plummeting to her death. It's sudden, final, and surprisingly brutal for Family Guy. Diane doesn't get a redemption arc. She doesn't get a moment of realization or regret. She just dies, and that's it. And the thing is, it works. It works because the show commits to it. They don't undercut the tension with a cutaway gag. They don't bring her back. She's gone, and her death marks a turning point for the show, proof that they could do serialized storytelling, that they could build suspense, that they could make characters other than the Griffins matter. Diane's death also says something about the cost of ambition and rejection in a town like Quahog, where fame is fleeting and bitterness can fester for decades. She was a woman scorned, a woman erased, and in her final moments, she tried to take back control in the only way she could, by destroying the people who destroyed her. It's dark, it's tragic, and it's one of the few deaths in Family Guy that feels earned, that feels like the natural endpoint of a character's journey, however twisted that journey became. But not all deaths in Family Guy are about characters we know. Some are about characters we barely meet, characters who exist only to die, to serve as punchlines or plot devices or shocking moments that get the audience's attention for 30 seconds before the show moves on. These are the disposable deaths, the ones that populate cutaway gags and background jokes, the random pedestrians hit by cars, the historical figures killed in flashbacks, the celebrities murdered in alternate realities. Family Guy has always had a strange relationship with death as comedy. It treats mortality like a toy, something to be played with, exaggerated, made absurd. People get decapitated, exploded, crushed, shot, stabbed, poisoned, and it's all played for laughs because the show exists in this consequence-free zone where violence is cartoonish and nothing really matters. Except sometimes it does. Sometimes a death in a cutaway lingers a little longer than it should. Sometimes you catch yourself thinking, wait, that was actually kind of dark. And that tension, that space between humor and horror, is where Family Guy lives. Take the deaths in the show's many parody episodes. Family Guy has done Star Wars. They've done murder mysteries. They've done musicals and road trip episodes and alternate timeline stories. And each one comes with its own body count. In the Star Wars parodies, characters die because that's what happens in Star Wars. The Death Star blows up, killing millions. Obi-Wan gets struck down. Stormtroopers get shot. It's all very faithful to the source material, except it's also Family Guy. So it's Peter and Chris and Herbert playing these roles, and the deaths feel both sincere and satirical, both respectful and irreverent. The show asks you to care about these moments because the original movies made you care, but it also reminds you constantly that this is ridiculous, that it's a cartoon dog playing Chewbacca, that none of this is real. And yet, when Brian as Chewbacca mourns, when Stewie as Darth Vader chooses redemption, there's something there. Something that transcends parody. Something that taps into why those stories worked in the first place. The deaths in these episodes matter because we've been conditioned to believe they matter. we bring our own emotional baggage to them. We remember watching the originals as kids and feeling something, and Family Guy knows this, exploits this, and somehow makes it funny without entirely draining it of meaning. Then there are the celebrity deaths, and this is where things get uncomfortable. Family Guy has built a reputation for brutal, often tasteless jokes about real people, both living and dead. They've depicted violent deaths of actors, musicians, politicians, public figures, usually in cutaway gags that last 10 seconds and are meant to shock, to offend, to push boundaries. Sometimes it's funny. Sometimes it's clever. Sometimes it's just cruel. The show has been criticized for this repeatedly. Accused of punching down, of being needlessly mean, of using shock value as a substitute for actual humor. And there's truth to that. But there's also something interesting happening beneath the surface. By killing celebrities over and over again in increasingly absurd ways, Family Guy is commenting on our culture's obsession with fame, with the way we build people up and tear them down, with the disposability of public figures in the media landscape. It's nihilistic, sure, but it's also weirdly honest. We don't really care about these people. We care about the idea of them. We care about what they represent. And when Family Guy kills them in a cutaway, it's acknowledging that distance, that unreality. It's saying, these aren't people to us. They're symbols. They're punchlines. They're fair game. Whether that's justified or not is up for debate, but it's definitely intentional. One of the most infamous examples is the show's treatment of historical figures. Family Guy loves to dip into history for its cutaways, showing us alternate versions of famous events where things go horribly, violently wrong. We see Abraham Lincoln get shot at Ford's Theater, except it's played for laughs. We see the Hindenburg disaster rendered in cartoonish detail. We see executions, assassinations, accidents, all filtered through the show's warped lens. And the strange thing is, by making these deaths funny, the show is also making them more real. It's forcing us to confront the absurdity of history, the randomness of tragedy, the thin line between comedy and horror. A man gets shot in the head and it changes the course of a nation. A blimp catches fire and dozens die, and it's captured on film and broadcast to the world. These things happened. They're real. And Family Guy takes that reality and twists it, distorts it, makes it silly, and in doing so, reminds us that history is full of death, that our past is built on bodies, and that laughter might be the only sane response to that overwhelming fact. But let's talk about the deaths that happen in the main timeline, the ones that are supposed to count, the ones that exist within the show's loose, often contradictory continuity. Because Family Guy does have a continuity, even if it's inconsistent, even if episodes reset and character development gets erased, and logic takes a back seat to whatever joke the writers want to tell. And within that continuity, people die. Sometimes they come back. Sometimes they don't. And sometimes it's hard to tell what's real and what's just another gag. There's a fluidity to death in Quahog, a sense that it's both permanent and reversible, depending on what the episode needs. Characters have been killed off in season finales, only to reappear in the next season premiere with no explanation. Side characters have been murdered in one episode and show up alive and well 2 episodes later. It's maddening if you think about it too hard, but it's also kind of liberating. It means the show can take risks. It can kill characters without worrying about the long-term consequences, because there are no long-term consequences. Everything resets. Everything is temporary. Except when it's not. Muriel Goldman, the Griffin's elderly neighbor, died in the season 10 episode Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q. Wait, no, that's not right. Muriel died earlier, in a different episode, in a different way. Or maybe she didn't. See, this is the problem with tracking deaths in Family Guy. The show doesn't care about consistency. Muriel has been depicted as dead multiple times, in multiple ways. And each time, the show just moves on like it didn't happen. She's been murdered. She's died of old age. She's been found dead in her home. And yet she also appears in later episodes, alive, gardening, being creepy. So which is it? The answer is, it doesn't matter. Muriel exists in a state of quantum mortality, both dead and alive, until the script needs her to be one or the other. And that's true for a lot of side characters in Family Guy. They die when it's funny. They live when it's convenient. And we, as viewers, are expected to just roll with it, to accept that this is a show where death is negotiable, where continuity is a suggestion, where anything can happen and nothing has to make sense. But then there are deaths that the show does take seriously, at least in the moment. Deaths that are played for emotion rather than laughs. Deaths that are meant to make you feel something, even if that feeling is fleeting, even if the next scene is a cutaway about a talking potato. Adam West, the former mayor of Quahog and one of the show's most beloved recurring characters, died in real life in June 2017, and Family Guy honored him with an episode called Adam West High, where his character also dies. It's a surprisingly gentle episode, full of callbacks and tributes, and it ends with the high school being renamed after him. There's no joke at the end, no undercut, just a sincere acknowledgement of a man who brought joy to the show and to its fans. And that's rare for Family Guy. That's the show saying, okay, we joke about everything, we're irreverent and offensive, and we don't take anything seriously. But this matters. This is real. And we're going to honor it the best way we know how. Adam West, the actor, and Adam West, the character, blur together in that episode. And the show allows itself to be sad, to be nostalgic, to mourn. And then the next episode, everything is back to normal. Because that's how the show works. That's how life works. People die, you grieve, and then you keep going. Carrie Fisher also died in real life, in December 2016, and she had voiced Angela, Peter's boss at the brewery, for several seasons. The show addressed her death indirectly, retiring the character without much fanfare, replacing her with new management. It wasn't a big moment. It wasn't an event episode. Angela just stopped appearing, and if you weren't paying attention, you might not have even noticed. But that absence is a kind of death too. A quiet one. A respectful one. The show's way of saying, we're not going to make a joke out of this. We're just going to let her fade into memory. And maybe that's more honest than a grand farewell. Maybe that's closer to how real grief works. People leave your life, and at first it's shocking, and then it's sad, and then it's just a fact. They're not there anymore. And you adjust. You move on. You find new rhythms. And eventually, you forget to notice their absence. That's the kind of death that Family Guy usually doesn't deal with, because it's not dramatic enough. It's not funny enough. But it's everywhere in the show if you look closely. Characters who used to appear regularly just stop showing up. Voices change. Actors age or pass away or move on to other projects. And the show absorbs these losses, incorporates them, keeps going. Because it has to. Because that's what long-running shows do. Let's shift to the deaths that happen because of time travel. Because Stewie has a time machine, and he's used it more than once to drastically alter the timeline. And each alteration comes with its own body count. In the episode Stewie kills Lois, Stewie actually does kill Lois. He shoots her on a cruise ship, and she falls into the ocean and is presumed dead. Except it's revealed in the next episode, Lois kills Stewie, that the whole thing was a simulation Stewie was running to see if he could get away with it. So Lois didn't really die. It was fake. But it felt real. The show committed to it for a full episode, showed the aftermath, showed the family grieving, showed Stewie almost getting away with murder. And then it pulled the rug out. It said, "Gotcha. None of that happened." And viewers were left feeling, what? Relieved? Annoyed? Tricked? All of the above? This is what Family Guy does. It plays with your expectations. It makes you invest in a storyline and then reveals it was all a joke, all a fake out, all meaningless. And that's frustrating, but it's also kind of brilliant because it mirrors the way the show itself operates. Nothing matters. Everything is temporary, even death. In Back to the Pilot, Stewie and Brian travel back in time to the very first episode of Family Guy. And in doing so, they create all sorts of paradoxes and problems. They accidentally cause 9/11 to not happen, which leads to a chain of events that makes the world worse. So they have to go back and make sure it does happen, which is a choice. A deeply uncomfortable choice that the show makes and then moves past without much reflection. But the point is, time travel in Family Guy means that death is flexible. Events can be rewritten. People who died can be saved. People who lived can be killed. The timeline is a toy, and Stewie plays with it whenever he wants. And each time he does, the stakes of death diminish a little more. If anyone can be brought back with a time machine, does death mean anything? If history can be changed, if outcomes can be reversed, if nothing is permanent, then what's the point of caring? The show doesn't answer this question. It just keeps making time travel episodes, keeps killing and resurrecting characters, keeps treating mortality like a revolving door. And then there's the multiverse, which adds another layer of death and unreality to the whole thing. In the episode Road to the Multiverse, Stewie and Brian jump between parallel universes using a device Stewie invented. And in each universe they visit, things are different. Sometimes slightly different, sometimes radically different. There's a universe where everyone is a Renaissance painting. A universe where everyone is drawn by Disney animators. A universe where Christianity never existed. A universe where humans, our pets, and dogs are the dominant species. And in some of these universes, characters are dead. Alternate versions of people we know are gone, killed by the circumstances of their reality, erased by the butterfly effect of whatever changed to make that universe distinct from the prime timeline. These deaths don't carry emotional weight because we don't know these versions of the characters, because they're just reflections, echoes, what ifs. But they're still deaths. They still count in some cosmic ledger, and they raise questions about identity and existence that the show has no interest in exploring deeply, but plants in your mind anyway. If there are infinite universes with infinite versions of you, and in most of them, you're dead, what does that say about the fragility of your existence? What does it mean to be alive in one timeline and dead in another? Family Guy treats this as a joke, as a sight gag, as an excuse for weird animation styles and pop culture references, but underneath, there's something genuinely unsettling about it. The multiverse episodes also allow the show to kill main characters without consequence. In one universe, Lois might be dead. In another, Peter never existed. In another, Stewie succeeded in killing Lois and took over the world. These are throwaway moments, quick cuts, background details in a montage of weird realities, but they stick with you. They suggest that death is always close, always possible, always happening somewhere. The show is saying that the only reason the Griffins are alive in the version we watch is luck, chance, arbitrary narrative choices. In another writer's room, in another timeline, they're all dead. And we'd be watching something else entirely, or nothing at all. This is the kind of existential dread that Family Guy stumbles into accidentally while trying to make jokes about robot chicken or flush toilets that flush upward. It's absurdist humor that curdles into something darker if you sit with it too long, which is exactly what we're doing right now, at whatever hour of the night you're listening to this, while the rest of the world sleeps and you're here thinking about cartoon deaths. let's talk about the episode Lois Kills Stewie, the conclusion to the two-parter that started with Stewie killing Lois. In this one, Lois is alive. She's been hiding, and she comes back to stop Stewie, who has now taken over Quahog and is ruling as a tiny dictator. There's a shootout, a literal shootout between a baby and his mother in the streets of their hometown, and it's played both seriously and absurdly, with explosions and Matrix-style slow motion and dramatic music. Stewie shoots Lois. Lois shoots Stewie. They both nearly die. The body count of random citizens and henchmen is high. And then, at the very end, we find out it was all a holodeck simulation. None of it happened. Every death, every betrayal, every moment of tension was fake. And the episode ends with Stewie and Brian discussing what they learned from the simulation, which is basically nothing. They learned that Stewie probably couldn't get away with killing Lois, and that's about it. The whole thing was an intellectual exercise, a game, a story they told themselves to pass the time. And all those deaths meant nothing because they were never real to begin with. This is a pattern with Family Guy. The show will build up to something big, something that feels important, and then reveal it was a dream, a simulation, a story within the story, and all the stakes evaporate. It's a narrative trick that works once, maybe twice, but the show does it over and over, and after a while, you start to wonder if anything in the show is real, if any death counts, if any emotion is genuine. The show trains you to not trust it, to assume that anything meaningful will be undercut, that nothing is permanent, that the reset button is always within reach, and that makes the deaths that do stick, like Francis Griffin's, like Diane Simmons's, like Adam West's, feel even more significant because they broke the pattern. They didn't get reversed. They didn't turn out to be fake. They just were, and then they were over. And the show moved on, and we moved on, but the absence remained. There's an episode called Amish Guy, where the Griffins visit an Amish community, and Peter befriends a man named Ezekiel. And by the end of the episode, Ezekiel dies. He has a heart attack during a barn raising, and Peter is there. And it's sudden, and quiet, and sad in a way that Family Guy usually avoids. There's no joke, no cutaway to lighten the mood. Just an old man falling, and people gathering around, and Peter realizing that his new friend is gone. The show doesn't dwell on it for long. The episode ends shortly after. But that death lingers because it's so understated, so real. It's the kind of death that happens in actual life, not in cartoons. No drama, no fanfare, just a body giving out, and then silence. Family Guy sneaks these moments in sometimes, these little reminders that beneath all the chaos and noise, there's something genuine, something human. And then the next episode is about Peter getting a vestigial twin or fighting a giant chicken again, and you forget that the show is capable of subtlety. But it is. It just chooses not to be most of the time. Let's not forget about the deaths in the show's various holiday specials and themed episodes. Family Guy loves Christmas episodes, and several of them involve death or near-death scenarios. In Road to the North Pole, Stewie and Brian travel to the North Pole to kill Santa Claus because Stewie didn't get the present he wanted, and when they get there, they find Santa, and his elves are dying. Literally dying. Overworked, starving, diseased, collapsing under the weight of modern Christmas consumerism. The episode is darkly satirical, showing Santa as a broken, exhausted figure who can barely keep up with the demand for presents. And the workshop is full of sick and dying elves who are suffering because humanity wants more and more every year. It's bleak. It's uncomfortable. And it's played mostly straight, with only occasional jokes to break the tension. Stewie and Brian end up helping Santa deliver presents to try to restore his health and magic. And it works, but the image of those dying elves stays with you. The show is making a point about consumption and greed and the cost of our holiday traditions, and it uses death to make that point. Not funny cartoon death, but slow, painful, systemic death. The kind that happens when systems break down and nobody cares enough to fix them until it's almost too late. Then there's The Simpsons Guy, the crossover episode where the Griffins meet the Simpsons, and while nobody dies in that episode, there's a fight between Peter and Homer that feels like it could end in death. They beat each other senseless, and the show lingers on the violence in a way that's unusual, showing blood and bruises and real exhaustion. It's a spectacle, sure, but it's also a commentary on the rivalry between the two shows, on the way fans pit them against each other, on the way these cartoon fathers have been fighting for cultural relevance for decades. The fight is brutal enough that you start to worry one of them might actually die, even though logically you know they won't. They're both too important to their respective shows. But the show plays with that fear, makes you feel the stakes, and then diffuses it with a joke about Kool-Aid. It's classic Family Guy. Build tension, make you care, then remind you it's all ridiculous. Death hovers over the scene like a possibility, like a threat, but never arrives. And maybe that's worse than if it did. Maybe the constant near misses, the endless flirtation with mortality without commitment, is more unsettling than actual death would be. There are also the deaths that happen off-screen, that are mentioned in passing, that exist only as backstory or exposition. Characters reference dead relatives, dead friends, dead ex-lovers, and these deaths shape who they are, even though we never see them. Quagmire's sister Brenda was in an abusive relationship, and while she didn't die, the episode Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, deals with domestic violence in a way that's surprisingly serious for Family Guy. Her boyfriend Jeff is eventually killed by Quagmire, Joe, and Peter, who lure him into the woods and murder him to protect Brenda. It's premeditated. It's cold. And it's framed as justice, as necessary, as the right thing to do, even though it's clearly murder. The show doesn't flinch from this. The three of them commit homicide and get away with it, and the episode ends with them agreeing never to speak of it again. Jeff's death is presented as a good thing, as a problem solved, and while you can argue he deserved it based on his behavior, it's still disturbing to watch three comedic characters cross that line and feel no remorse. It's one of the few times Family Guy has depicted a death that feels morally complicated, where the show asks you to be okay with murder because the victim was worse. And most viewers probably are okay with it. But that doesn't make it less dark. Joe Swanson, the paraplegic cop who lives next door to the Griffins, has been in countless near-death situations throughout the show's run. He's been shot, blown up, crushed, set on fire, and he always survives because he's a main character, and main characters don't die unless the show wants to make a point. But there are episodes where Joe's mortality is front and center, where his disability makes him vulnerable, where he confronts the fact that his body is fragile and his life could end at any moment. In A Lot Going On Upstairs, Joe becomes a quadriplegic temporarily after another injury, and the episode deals with his depression, his sense of worthlessness, his fear that he's a burden to his family. It's heavy stuff for a show that usually uses Joe's disability as a punchline. And while he recovers by the end of the episode, the shadow of that despair lingers. The show is acknowledging that Joe lives with a kind of death already. A loss of the body he used to have. A life he used to live. He's been mourning himself for years, and every dangerous situation he gets into is tinged with the knowledge that he's already lost so much. What's a little more? Bonnie Swanson, Joe's wife, has her own complicated relationship with death and loss. She was pregnant for what felt like 7 seasons in real time, a running joke that the show eventually resolved by just having her give birth without explanation. But during all those years, there was this sense of suspended animation, of time not passing normally, of a life stuck in waiting. And when the baby finally came, it didn't change much. Bonnie is still unhappy, still trapped in a marriage that doesn't fulfill her, still going through the motions. There's a kind of living death in that, a sense that she's been slowly disappearing, even though she's still there. The show occasionally hints at this, shows her desperation or resentment or sadness, and then buries it under a joke. But it's there. This undercurrent of people who are alive but not living, who are present but absent, who are dying in slow motion, and nobody notices because they're still breathing. Cleveland Brown left Family Guy to star in his own spin-off, The Cleveland Show, which ran for 4 seasons before being canceled, and then Cleveland moved back to Quahog, and everything went back to normal. But in a way, Cleveland died when he left. The Cleveland who came back wasn't quite the same. His family was different. His history had changed. He'd lived a whole other life in another show, and when that show ended, that life ended, and he had to come back and pretend nothing had happened. It's a weird kind of death, a narrative death, where a character is written out of one story and into another and then back again, and each transition erases a little bit of who they were. Cleveland's return was treated as a non-event by the show, like he'd just been on vacation. But it represented a failure, the death of a spin-off, the absorption of a character back into the mothership because he couldn't survive on his own. And nobody talks about it. Nobody mourns it. It just is. Let's talk about Consuela, the Griffin's housekeeper, who has been in mortal danger more times than you'd expect for a cleaning lady. She's been held hostage, threatened, caught in explosions, and she always survives with the same unflappable demeanor, the same repeated phrases, the same immigrant stereotype that the show milks for all it's worth. Consuela exists in a space where death can't touch her because she's a joke, a catchphrase, a cartoon within a cartoon. But the situations she's in are often genuinely dangerous, and the fact that she survives them all without changing, without learning, without growing, makes her feel less like a person and more like a ghost. She's already dead, in a sense. She's a flat character in a show that occasionally pretends to have depth. She can't die because she was never fully alive. And that's true for a lot of the side characters in Family Guy. They exist to serve a function, to deliver a punchline, to fill space. And when they're in danger, there's no suspense because we know they'll be fine. They have to be fine. The show needs them for the next joke. Jillian Russell, Brian's ex-girlfriend, disappeared from the show after she and Brian broke up. And while she didn't die, her absence feels like death. She was a major part of several seasons, a character with her own storylines and relationships. And then she was just gone. Written out. Forgotten. The show moved on, and so did Brian. And Jillian exists now only in memory, in old episodes, in the past. This is another kind of death that happens constantly in long-running shows. Characters who are important become irrelevant. Actors leave or are let go. Storylines are abandoned, and the show just keeps going, piling new characters and new jokes on top of the old ones, burying the past under the present. Jillian is dead in the sense that she no longer exists in the world of the show. She's not coming back. Her story is over. And nobody mourned her because she was kind of annoying, and the breakup was framed as Brian leveling up. But she's gone, and that's a kind of ending, a kind of loss. Seamus, the man with no arms and a wooden leg who works at the shipyard, is another character who exists in constant danger but never dies. He's been crushed, drowned, blown up, and he's always back in the next episode he appears in, unchanged, still doing his job, still making jokes about his disabilities. The show uses him for dark physical comedy, putting him in situations where his lack of arms makes things worse. And it's funny in a shocking, uncomfortable way. But it also raises questions about why he's still alive. In a realistic world, Seamus would have died a dozen times over. But Family Guy isn't realistic. It's a cartoon, And in cartoons, you can survive anything as long as the show needs you to. Seamus's continued survival is a joke in itself, a commentary on cartoon physics and narrative convenience. He should be dead. He's not. And that's the punchline. Tricia Takanawa, the Asian American news reporter, has been present at countless disasters, crime scenes, and dangerous events throughout the show's run, and she's always fine. She reports from war zones, from inside burning buildings, from the middle of riots, and she's never hurt, never scared, always professional. She's a parody of local news reporters who show up at tragedies and treat them like content, like stories to be packaged and sold. And in that sense, Tricia is surrounded by death constantly. She's always standing next to it, describing it, broadcasting it, but never affected by it. She's an observer, a witness, and the distance between her and the deaths she reports on is enormous. She could be killed at any moment while doing her job, but she won't be. Because she's not that kind of character. She exists to deliver exposition, to set up jokes, to be the voice that tells us something terrible just happened while remaining completely detached from the emotion of it. She's Death's reporter, Death's publicist, and she'll never be Death's victim, because that would make her too real. There's a darkness to the way Family Guy treats its female characters and death. Women in the show are often victims, either of violence or of the men around them. And their deaths or near deaths are played for shock value or as motivation for male characters. Diane Simmons was killed after becoming a murderer, punished for her rage and her rejection. Lois has been fake killed multiple times, always as a way to drive Peter or Stewie's story forward. Bonnie is trapped in a life that's slowly suffocating her. Meg is abused by her family and the universe itself, dying a little more each episode, even though she's still breathing. The show doesn't seem to notice or care about this pattern, or maybe it does and that's the point. Maybe it's satirizing the way women are treated in media by exaggerating it to an absurd degree. But it's hard to tell. Satire and sincerity blur together in Family Guy. The show makes misogynistic jokes, and then makes jokes about making misogynistic jokes, and you're left wondering what the show actually believes, if it believes anything at all, or if it's just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. Meg Griffin is the most interesting case study in living death in the entire show. She doesn't die, at least not permanently, but she's been killed in cutaways, dream sequences, alternate timelines, and fake-outs more than any other character. The show uses her as a punching bag, literally and figuratively, and her continued existence in the face of constant abuse from her family and the universe is both tragic and darkly comedic. Meg wants to die sometimes. She's expressed suicidal ideation. She's been to the brink. And the show plays this for laughs, which is horrifying, but also maybe honest. Because the joke isn't that suicide is funny. The joke is that Meg's life is so terrible that wanting to escape it makes sense. And the fact that she doesn't, the fact that she keeps going, is either heroic or pathetic, depending on how you look at it. Meg is death adjacent. She exists in the space between living and dying, between mattering and not mattering, and the show has built an entire running gag out of her erasure. Every time someone tells her to shut up, every time her family forgets about her, every time she's excluded or ignored or abused, she dies a little. And the show just keeps doing it, season after season, and we keep watching. And at some point you have to ask yourself why. Why is this funny? Why do we accept this? What does it say about us that we laugh at Meg's suffering? The show doesn't answer these questions. It just keeps making Meg jokes. And Meg keeps existing, keeps trying, keeps hoping that maybe one day things will get better. And they won't. They never will. Because she's not a person, she's a narrative device, a container for our own fears about being unloved and unwanted. Meg is all of us, at our worst moments, when we feel invisible and worthless. And the show knows that, and it weaponizes it, and we laugh because it hurts. Chris Griffin doesn't die either, but he flirts with it in ways that are both literal and metaphorical. There are episodes where Chris is in genuine danger, where his innocence and stupidity put him in situations that could easily turn fatal. He's been kidnapped, manipulated, nearly recruited by cults, nearly killed by his own ignorance. And the show plays it for laughs because Chris is too dumb to realize how close he is to death most of the time. There's something deeply sad about that. Chris is a child, technically, or at least he was when the show started, and even though he's aged into a teenager, he's still fundamentally innocent, still fundamentally vulnerable. The world is dangerous, and Chris doesn't have the tools to protect himself, and his family barely notices. Peter is too self-absorbed. Lois is too exhausted. Meg is too busy being abused herself. And Stewie is, well, Stewie. So Chris stumbles through life, nearly dying, nearly being hurt, nearly being lost. And he survives because the show needs him to, not because anyone is taking care of him. There's a neglect at the heart of the Griffin family that manifests as near-death experiences for the kids. They're expendable in the eyes of their parents, in the eyes of the show, and the only reason they survive is cartoon logic. In a realistic world, Chris and Meg would have been seriously harmed or killed by their environment years ago. But this isn't a realistic world. This is Family Guy, where consequences are optional and children survive on luck alone. There's an episode where Chris dates a girl who turns out to be wanted by the police, and she uses him as a hostage. And there's a standoff. And Chris could have been killed. He's standing there with a gun pointed at him, and he doesn't fully understand what's happening. And the episode resolves without him being hurt. But the image lingers. A teenage boy, confused and scared, used as a shield, and his father making jokes on the other side of the police line. That's the Griffin family dynamic in miniature. Someone is in danger, and the rest of them are either oblivious or making it worse. And when it's over, when the danger passes, nobody talks about it. Nobody processes it. They just move on to the next thing, the next crisis, the next episode. This is how trauma works when it's never addressed. It accumulates. It builds. And eventually, even if you survive physically, something inside you dies. The part of you that felt safe. The part that trusted the world. The part that believed your family would protect you. Chris has that 1,000-yard stare sometimes. That look of someone who's been through too much and doesn't know how to articulate it. And the show uses that for comedy. Uses his blankness, his confusion, his damage, as a setup for jokes. And it works because it's a cartoon, and we're conditioned to accept that cartoon characters don't have inner lives, don't carry scars, don't remember. But they do, in their way. Or at least the show hints that they do, in those brief moments between jokes when you catch a glimpse of something real. Let's talk about the chicken. Ernie, the giant chicken. Peter's nemesis. They've fought multiple times across the show's run, and each fight is an extended, over-the-top action sequence where both of them should absolutely die multiple times, but don't. They fall from buildings. They crash through planes. They get hit by trains. They beat each other with cars and pipes and whatever's nearby. And they survive, get up, and keep fighting. These fights are parodies of action movies, sure, but they're also the purest expression of Family Guy's relationship with death. Violence without consequence. Pain without permanence. They destroy entire city blocks and nobody cares. They cause untold collateral damage and it's never mentioned again. These fights exist outside the rules of the world, outside mortality, outside sense. They're cartoons within a cartoon, hyper-reality, and in that space, death can't exist because death would end the fight. And the fight is the point. The fight is eternal. Peter and the chicken will keep fighting forever because that's what they do. It's their purpose, their identity, and in a weird way that makes them immortal. They can't die because dying would mean the fight is over, and the fight can never be over. It's one of the few things in Family Guy that's truly permanent. Not death, but endless, meaningless conflict. Except the chicken did die once. In one episode, Peter and the chicken have their usual fight, and at the end, the chicken falls and is impaled on a spike or crushed or something equally fatal, and Peter walks away thinking it's finally over. And for a while, it is. The chicken doesn't appear for several episodes. He's gone. Dead. Finished. And then, of course, he comes back. Because of course he does. He survived somehow, or was resurrected, or maybe it was a different chicken all along. The show doesn't care to explain. The point is, even the most obviously fatal death in Family Guy can be reversed if the show wants it to be. Death is a choice, a narrative decision, and the writers can choose to undo it anytime they want. This should make death meaningless in the show, and maybe it does. But there's something existentially terrifying about a universe where death is arbitrary, where it can happen to anyone at any time, but also might not mean anything, might be temporary, might be erased by the next episode. We live in a universe with rules. Family Guy doesn't. And that lack of rules makes everything, including death, unpredictable and unreliable. Herbert the old pedophile neighbor is another character who should have died years ago just from being ancient, and the show jokes about this constantly. Herbert is decrepit, barely able to move, his body failing in real time, and yet he persists. He's a creep, a predator, and the show plays his attraction to young boys as comedy, which is its own deeply problematic choice. But setting that aside, Herbert's continued existence is itself a joke. He should be dead. He looks dead. He sounds like he's dying with every word. And yet he's there, episode after episode, outliving characters who are younger and healthier, defying mortality through sheer narrative convenience. Herbert is what happens when a show needs a certain type of character and doesn't care about realism or good taste. He exists because the writers think he's funny, and as long as they think that, he'll keep existing, keep creeping, keep defying death. He's a zombie in all but name, already dead, but still walking around, still talking, still being written into episodes, and we're supposed to just accept it. Accept that this is the world of Family Guy, where ancient predators live forever and good people die in car accidents. Horace, the bartender at the Drunken Clam, is another character who died and then didn't. He was killed in the episode Save the Clam, shot during a robbery at the bar, and his death was treated seriously within the episode. The characters mourned him. They talked about how much the clam meant to them and how Horace was a part of their lives. It was a rare moment of genuine emotion in a show that usually undercuts everything. And then a few seasons later, Horace was just back. No explanation. No resurrection episode. No acknowledgement that he'd been dead. He was just tending bar again, like nothing happened. And fans noticed, obviously, and complained, and the show ignored them. Because this is what Family Guy does. It makes decisions, commits to them in the moment, and then forgets about them when they're inconvenient. Horace's death and resurrection is a perfect encapsulation of the show's approach to continuity. Things matter when they matter, and then they don't. Death is real until it isn't. And you, the viewer, are expected to either accept this or stop watching. Most people accept it. Because at a certain point, if you're still watching Family Guy, you've made peace with the fact that nothing makes sense and nothing is permanent except the core cast. Everyone else is fair game. Everyone else can be killed and brought back and killed again. And it doesn't matter because they're not really characters. They're just props. Let's shift to the deaths that happen in the show's more experimental episodes. The ones that break format. That try something different. There's an episode called Back to the Woods, where a man named James Woods steals Peter's identity and lives his life while Peter is forced to live as James Woods. It's a body swap story, sort of, and while nobody dies in the episode, There's a kind of death that happens when your identity is stolen. When someone else becomes you and you become nobody. Peter loses his family, his home, his sense of self, and he has to fight to get it back. And when he does, when he reclaims his life, the James Woods who was pretending to be him just disappears, stops existing in that role, dies as Peter even though the real James Woods is still alive. Identity death, ego death, the death of the self that happens when you're replaced. When someone else steps into your shoes and does it better or different or just as well. Family Guy doesn't explore this deeply. It's still a comedy episode, but the horror is there underneath. What if someone could just take your life? What if you could be erased and nobody noticed? What if the people who love you loved the imposter just as much? These are death-adjacent fears. Fears about mattering, about being unique, about being irreplaceable. And the show touches on them and then moves on. But they stay with you. There's also The Simpsons Guy, which we touched on earlier. But let's go deeper. The episode is a crossover, and crossovers always involve a certain kind of death. The death of the fourth wall. The death of each show's isolation. The death of the idea that these are separate universes. When the Griffins meet the Simpsons, both shows die a little. They become less distinct, less special. They prove that they're just cartoons, just products, just content that can be mashed together for ratings. And there's something sad about that. Something that diminishes both shows. The Simpsons had been on the air for over 20 years when this episode aired. Family Guy had been canceled and revived. Both shows were past their prime, coasting on legacy, and this crossover felt like an admission that neither was strong enough to stand alone anymore. They needed each other. They needed the gimmick. And in the process, they both became less than they were. The episode is fine. It has jokes. It has moments. But it's a death rattle. A sign that the creative well is running dry. And the fight between Peter and Homer, which should be cathartic, which should be epic, ends up feeling tired. Two old characters beating on each other because that's what the episode requires, not because it means anything. It's violence without purpose, death without stakes. And when it's over, both families go back to their respective shows and nothing has changed. Nobody learned anything. Nobody grew. It was just content. Just 2 hours of your life you'll never get back. Just another death. Not of a character, but of the hope that these shows still have something to say. The episode Viewer Mail is a series of segments where the show answers viewer letters with short stories, and in one of them titled Super Griffins, the family gets superpowers. And people die in that segment. Villains die. Bystanders die. There's a body count. And it's all played for laughs because it's a parody of superhero stories. But the deaths are there. The show is acknowledging that superheroes kill people, that collateral damage is a thing, that power without accountability leads to death. And the Griffins, as superheroes, are careless and destructive, and they don't feel bad about it, because it's just a story within the story, just a throwaway segment, just a joke. But it's also a reflection of how the show sees its characters, as inherently selfish, as incapable of real heroism, as people who, given power, would absolutely abuse it and hurt people and not care. That's dark. That's a damning portrait of the Griffin family, even if it's hidden inside a parody segment in a non-canon episode. The show is telling us who these people really are, and they're not good. They're not heroes. They're barely functional humans. And if they had power, people would die. Lots of people. And the Griffins would make jokes about it and move on. Then there's Partial Terms of Endearment, an episode that was banned from airing on Fox because it dealt with abortion. The episode involves a woman asking Lois to be a surrogate, and then the woman and her husband die in a car accident, and Lois is left pregnant with a baby that's not hers, and she has to decide whether to keep it or terminate the pregnancy. The episode is surprisingly even-handed for Family Guy, presenting both pro-choice and pro-life arguments through different characters. But the key thing for our purposes is the death. The couple dies suddenly, violently, off-screen, and their deaths create the central conflict of the episode. Their deaths make the pregnancy a burden instead of a gift. Their deaths turn an act of love into a moral dilemma. And the show sits with that, doesn't make it easy, doesn't resolve it neatly. Lois ends up choosing to have an abortion, and the episode ends, and it never aired on network television because the subject matter was too controversial. But it exists. It's out there on DVD, on streaming. And those deaths, the deaths of two people we never meet, who exist only as a plot device, ripple through the episode and change everything. That's the power of death, even in a comedy. Even in a show as irreverent as Family Guy. Death recontextualizes everything. It makes the trivial serious. It makes jokes harder to land. It makes you think. There's an episode where Quagmire's father, Dan Quagmire, transitions and becomes Ida. And while nobody dies in that episode, it's about a kind of death. The death of the person Dan was. The death of the identity he performed for decades. And the show handles it better than you'd expect, showing Quagmire's initial rejection and eventual acceptance, showing that transition is hard and complicated and involves loss even as it involves becoming more authentically yourself. But then in later episodes, the show makes transphobic jokes at Ida's expense, reduces her to a punchline, treats her transition as fodder for cheap laughs. And that's its own kind of death. The death of goodwill. The death of the promise that the show could handle sensitive topics with care. Family Guy is constantly killing its own potential, its own chances to be more than what it is. It'll have a good episode, a thoughtful episode, an episode that suggests growth and depth. And then the next episode, it's back to the same old jokes, the same old cruelty, the same old laziness. And you realize the show isn't interested in growth. It's not interested in being better. It's comfortable where it is, doing what it does. And if that means killing off any chance of real meaning or real change, so be it. The show will survive. It always does, even if it's dead inside. Let's talk about the deaths that happen in video game episodes or fantasy sequences. There's an episode where the family plays a video game together and their avatars die repeatedly, respawning, dying again, caught in a loop of virtual death. And it's played for laughs because video game death doesn't mean anything. You just restart. Try again. Keep going. But there's something there. Something about the way we've become desensitized to death through media, through games, through shows like Family Guy, where people die every episode and it's fine, it's funny, it's meaningless. We've trained ourselves not to feel it, not to let it affect us. We watch characters die, and we laugh and we move on, and we don't think about what that does to us, how it shapes our relationship with real death, real loss. Family Guy is part of that cultural numbing. It contributes to it. It makes death into a joke so often that when real death happens, when someone we know dies, we almost don't know how to process it. We've seen so much fake death that real death feels unreal. And the show knows this. The show is aware that it's desensitizing you, and it doesn't care. Or maybe it does care, and that's the point. Maybe the constant parade of meaningless deaths is meant to make the few meaningful deaths stand out, to remind you that death can still matter if you let it. But that's giving the show too much credit. Most of the time, Family Guy is just doing what gets laughs. And death gets laughs. So death stays. There are deaths in the show's cutaway gags that are genuinely disturbing if you think about them for more than a second. Random people falling off buildings, getting hit by cars, being eaten by animals, exploding, drowning, burning. These are quick shots, 2 or 3 seconds each, meant to punctuate a joke or reference, and they pile up. Over 20 plus seasons, hundreds of episodes, thousands of cutaways, The body count in Family Guy is astronomical. Probably tens of thousands of deaths, maybe more. Most of them nameless, faceless, meaningless. Just visual noise. Just shock value. Just the show saying, hey look, someone died. Isn't that funny? And sometimes it is funny. Comedy is subjective, but sometimes you catch yourself thinking, why is this supposed to be funny? What's the joke? That someone died? That's the whole joke? And you realize that yes, that's the whole joke. Death is inherently absurd. Life is fragile and random, and it ends without warning, and there's something darkly comedic about that, if you're in the right headspace. Or the wrong headspace, depending on how you look at it. Family Guy lives in that space. That place where tragedy and comedy overlap. Where you laugh because the alternative is too heavy. Peter has almost died so many times, it's impossible to count. He's fallen off roofs, been hit by cars, been shot, stabbed, poisoned, blown up, drowned, electrocuted, crushed. He's had heart attacks, strokes, seizures. He's been to the hospital dozens of times. And he's always fine, always back to normal by the next episode. His body is indestructible in a way that defies all logic, all biology, all sense. Peter is a cartoon character, yes, but he's also a symbol of the average American man who eats terribly and never exercises and does dangerous, stupid things and somehow survives. Against all odds, against all probability. Peter should be dead. Statistically, medically, logically, he should have died seasons ago. But he doesn't. Because the show needs him. Because he's the center. Because without Peter, there is no Family Guy. So he survives. No matter what. No matter how much damage he takes. He's immortal not because he's special, but because he's necessary. And that's its own kind of horror. Being unable to die, even when you probably should. Being trapped in a body that won't quit even, when quitting would be a mercy. Peter doesn't think about this, of course. Peter doesn't think about anything. But we can think about it. We can see it. We can recognize that Peter is a prisoner of his own narrative, doomed to keep living, keep suffering, keep being stupid, forever. Lois has also almost died countless times, and unlike Peter, her near deaths often feel more malicious. She's been targeted by people who want to hurt her, who want to kill her. Stewie has tried to kill her multiple times across different episodes and timelines. She's been kidnapped, held hostage, thrown from moving vehicles. And she survives because she's tougher than she looks, because she's the matriarch, because the show needs her to keep the family together. But there's a weariness to Lois sometimes, a sense that she's tired of surviving, tired of being the adult in the room, tired of cleaning up everyone else's messes. She's died inside in a lot of ways. Her dreams are dead. Her youth is dead. The person she thought she'd become is dead. And she's left with this life, this family, this endless cycle of chaos and dysfunction. And she can't leave. She's tried, in some episodes. She's fantasized about it. But she always comes back. Because where else would she go? What else would she do? She's defined by her family. Without them, she's nothing. Or at least, that's what the show tells her. That's what the show tells us. And so she stays. And she survives. And she dies a little more each day. Not literally, but close enough. Stewie Griffin is obsessed with death. It's been one of his defining characteristics since the beginning. He wants to kill Lois. He's built weapons of mass destruction. He's constructed elaborate murder plots. He's a baby with the mind of a supervillain and the resources to actually carry out his homicidal fantasies. Except he never does. Not really. Not permanently. The Stewie who wanted to kill Lois, who spent entire episodes plotting her demise, who saw matricide as his ultimate goal, that Stewie is dead now. Not literally dead, but gone. Erased by character development, by the show's shift in tone, by the writers deciding that murderous Stewie was less useful than gay-coded neurotic Stewie. It happened gradually, so gradually you might not have noticed. But if you go back and watch early seasons and then watch recent seasons, it's like watching two different characters. Early Stewie would have killed someone by now. Early Stewie was dangerous, unpredictable, genuinely threatening, despite being an infant. And then something shifted. The show got softer. Stewie got softer. His evil plans became less about world domination and murder, and more about time travel adventures with Brian, and dealing with his sexuality, and his relationship with his family. And that early Stewie, that monster baby, he died. The show killed him as surely as if they'd written an episode where he got hit by a car. They just did it slowly, over seasons, over years. Until one day you realized he hadn't tried to kill anyone in a long time, and you couldn't remember when it stopped. This is character death by evolution, by the show's needs changing, by audiences responding differently to different versions of the character. And it's not unique to Stewie. All the characters in Family Guy have died and been reborn multiple times as the show has shifted its tone and focus. Peter was dumb, but had moments of genuine emotion and insight in early seasons. Now he's aggressively stupid, brain damaged, barely functional. That early Peter is dead. Brian was pretentious but well-meaning, the voice of liberal reason in a chaotic household. Now he's a failed writer, a bitter has-been, a hypocrite whose political posturing is constantly undercut by his personal failings. That early Brian is dead too. The show kills its own characters by changing them beyond recognition, by filing away the edges that made them interesting, by flanderizing them into one-note jokes. And we accept it because it happens slowly, because we keep watching, because we're invested in the show, even as it murders the things we loved about it. We're complicit in these deaths. We enable them by continuing to watch, by not demanding better, by accepting that this is just what long-running shows do. They decay. They forget what made them work. They kill their own legacy, one episode at a time. There's an episode called Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, that we mentioned earlier, and it deserves more attention because it's one of the few episodes where Family Guy tries to deal with a real-world issue seriously. Brenda, Quagmire's sister, is in an abusive relationship with a man named Jeff. He hits her. He controls her. He isolates her from her family. And the episode shows this. Doesn't make jokes about it. Plays it straight and uncomfortable and real. Quagmire, Joe, and Peter eventually decide that the only way to save Brenda is to kill Jeff. So they do. They lure him into the woods under false pretenses, and Peter strangles him to death while Joe and Quagmire watch. It's premeditated murder. It's vigilante justice. And the episode frames it as the right thing to do, as necessary, as the only option when the system fails. Jeff's death is brutal and unpleasant, and lingers on screen longer than most deaths in Family Guy. You see him struggle. You see the life leave his eyes. You see Peter's hands around his throat and the determination on Peter's face. And then it's over. Jeff is dead. They bury the body. They go home. And they agree never to speak of it again. This episode is fascinating because it asks the audience to be okay with murder, to accept that sometimes killing someone is justified. And most viewers probably were okay with it because Jeff was clearly a monster, clearly irredeemable, clearly a threat that needed to be eliminated. But the show is also showing us that Peter, Quagmire, and Joe are now murderers. They've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. They've taken a life, and the show never addresses the psychological impact of that. There's no follow-up episode where Peter has nightmares, or guilt, or second thoughts. It just happened, and then it was over, and life went on. which is either incredibly realistic, suggesting that some people can kill and feel fine about it if they believe it was justified, or incredibly irresponsible, suggesting that murder is no big deal as long as the victim deserved it. Family Guy doesn't care which interpretation you choose. The show did what it wanted to do, made the statement it wanted to make, and moved on. Jeff is dead. His death was deemed necessary by the narrative. And that's all there is to it. No moral ambiguity, no consequences. Just a problem solved through violence, and everyone's okay with it. But there are consequences we don't see, ripples we can imagine. Brenda has to live, knowing her family killed her boyfriend to save her. Even if she's relieved, even if she's grateful, that's a weight. That's something you carry. The knowledge that someone died because of you, for you, to protect you. And Brenda just disappears from the show after that. She's mentioned occasionally, but she doesn't appear. It's like she died too. Like the trauma was so great that she had to be written out, removed from the narrative, erased. The show saved her from her abuser, and then killed her character by making her too damaged, too complicated, too real to be funny anymore. So she's gone. Another ghost. Another person who existed briefly in the world of Family Guy, and then vanished when their story became inconvenient. This happens a lot. Characters who have real problems, who go through real trauma, tend to disappear from the show because Family Guy doesn't know what to do with genuine human emotion for more than one episode. It can't sustain it. It can't build on it. So it just erases the characters and pretends they never mattered. Let's talk about the deaths that happen in dream sequences and fantasy episodes, because there are a lot of them, and they occupy this weird space where they're both real and not real. When Peter dreams that he's in a different time period or a different reality, and people die in that dream, do those deaths count? They felt real in the moment. The episode committed to them. But then Peter wakes up and none of it happened. Except it did happen, in the sense that we watched it, we experienced it, the show created it and broadcast it, and it exists now as part of the show's history. Dream deaths are real deaths in every way except causality. They don't affect the ongoing narrative, but they affect us, the audience. We saw someone die. We felt something about it, or didn't feel anything, and either way, it's part of our experience of the show. Family Guy uses dreams and fantasies as a way to kill characters without killing them, to explore dark scenarios without commitment, to have its cake and eat it too. It's a cheat, narratively, but it works because we accept the rules of the medium. We understand that when a character wakes up, everything resets. But understanding it doesn't make the deaths we witnessed any less visceral in the moment. Doesn't make them less disturbing or sad or shocking or funny. They happened. Just not in a way that matters to the continuity. Only to us. There's something deeply postmodern about this. The idea that events can be simultaneously real and unreal, meaningful and meaningless, depending on which level of narrative you're examining. Family Guy exists in this postmodern space constantly, breaking the fourth wall, acknowledging its own constructedness, treating its characters as both people and puppets. And death in this space becomes slippery, undefined, impossible to pin down. Is Brian's death real? The first time, it felt real. But then he came back, so it wasn't real. But the pain Stewie felt was real, or at least the show presented it as real. But Stewie is a cartoon character, so nothing he feels is real. Except we felt it watching him, so it became real for us. This is the paradox of caring about fiction. We know it's not real, but we feel like it is. We know these characters are drawings and voice actors, but we mourn them when they die. We're invested in things that don't exist. And Family Guy exploits this, plays with it, makes us care, and then laughs at us for caring. It's mean-spirited maybe, but it's also honest. It's saying, you know this is all fake, right? You know none of this matters, right? And we say yes, we know, but we care anyway. We can't help it. That's what stories do. They make us care about things that aren't real. And when those things die, we grieve, even if they come back, even if it was all a dream, even if it never mattered. Death in Family Guy is also often a commentary on celebrity and fame. The show kills celebrities constantly, both through parody and through direct depiction. Sometimes it's affectionate, a tribute to someone the writers admire. Sometimes it's vicious, a takedown of someone they don't. And sometimes it's just random, a name pulled from a hat, a person turned into a punchline for no reason other than that they're famous and therefore fair game. When a celebrity dies in real life, Family Guy often acknowledges it, sometimes with a title card, sometimes with a reference in an episode, sometimes by retiring a character they voiced. But the show has also depicted the deaths of celebrities who were still alive when the episode aired, which is a weird and uncomfortable choice. It's one thing to make jokes about dead public figures. It's another to animate their deaths while they're still living, still able to see it, still able to be hurt by it. The show doesn't seem to care about this distinction. Or maybe it does care, and that's why it does it. To provoke, to offend, to push boundaries. Family Guy has always been a show that wants to see how far it can go, how much it can get away with, and killing living celebrities in cartoon form is part of that. It's transgressive, it's tasteless, and it's definitely intentional. But what does it mean when a show kills a real person in fiction? Is it a form of symbolic violence? Is it wish fulfillment? Is it just a joke that doesn't mean anything? The show would probably say it's just a joke, that people need to lighten up, that nothing in a cartoon matters. But the people being depicted might feel differently. Their families might feel differently. And the audience definitely responds, either by laughing or being offended or just feeling vaguely uncomfortable. Death is one of the last taboos in comedy, one of the few things that can still shock people, and Family Guy knows this and uses it relentlessly. The show is constantly testing the limits of what's acceptable, what's funny, what's too far. And death is the ultimate too far. It's the final line. And the show crosses it every episode, multiple times, in multiple ways. And we keep watching. We keep laughing. Or we stop watching, but other people start watching. And the show continues, feeding on controversy, thriving on outrage, surviving because it's willing to go places other shows won't. There's an episode where the show depicts the deaths of celebrities in a compilation, a montage of famous people dying in various ways, and it's played as a celebration, a tribute to the show's history of tasteless jokes. And it is tasteless, but it's also comprehensive. It's the show acknowledging what it is, what it does, how it's built its reputation. Family Guy is the show that kills celebrities. That's part of its brand, part of its identity. And this episode is the show owning that, celebrating it, refusing to apologize for it. Whether you find that admirable or reprehensible probably says more about you than about the show. Family Guy doesn't have a moral center. It doesn't take a position beyond, this is funny to us, and if it's not funny to you, that's fine. Watch something else. It's amoral comedy, nihilistic comedy. Comedy that exists purely to provoke a reaction, any reaction, whether that's a laugh or a cringe or anger. And death is the most reliable way to provoke. So the show keeps killing, keeps crossing lines, keeps daring you to stop watching, and you don't. Or you do, but someone else starts. The show is bigger than any individual viewer. It doesn't need you. It doesn't need your approval. It just needs to keep existing. And as long as it's willing to kill anyone, anything, for a joke, it will. Let's talk about the Grim Reaper as a character in Family Guy, because he appears multiple times and his existence in the show's universe is fascinating. Death is a person. He has a personality. He's tired, overworked, kind of pathetic. He's voiced by Norm Macdonald initially, and later by Adam Carolla, and he's depicted as someone who's just doing a job, not a malevolent force or a tragic figure. Just a guy with a difficult job who's been doing it forever and is kind of over it. Death in Family Guy is bureaucratic. He has rules. He has a boss. He makes mistakes. He's fallible. And that changes the entire meaning of death in the show. If death is just a person doing a job, then death is negotiable. Death can be bargained with, delayed, tricked. And Peter does trick him in the episode Death is a Bitch. Peter sprains Death's ankle, and Death can't work, and so nobody can die. And the world starts to fall apart because death is necessary. Death is part of the system, and without it, everything breaks down. It's a clever premise, and the episode plays it well, showing how death isn't the enemy. Death is just part of life, and trying to avoid it creates more problems than it solves. But it also makes death less scary, less final. If death is just a guy you can talk to, maybe even become friends with, then death loses its power. It becomes mundane. And maybe that's the point. Maybe Family Guy is demystifying death, stripping away the fear and the reverence, and showing it as something ordinary, something everyone goes through, nothing special. Or maybe the show just thought it would be funny to have Peter hang out with the Grim Reaper and didn't think about the implications. That's possible too. Family Guy often stumbles into profundity by accident, by trying to be funny and inadvertently saying something true or meaningful. The show isn't deep, but sometimes depth happens anyway, like water pooling in a shallow dish. You can't help it. It just accumulates. And the character of Death, as mundane and pathetic as the show makes him, says something about mortality that's actually kind of comforting. Death isn't a monster. Death isn't evil. Death is just the end. And the end is run by a tired middle manager who just wants to get through his shift. That's not so scary. That's almost reassuring. Death comes back in other episodes too, including one where he's dating a woman and needs Peter's help with relationship advice, which is absurd on multiple levels, but also kinda sweet. Death is lonely. Death wants companionship. Death is, in his way, alive. He has needs and desires and problems just like anyone else. And by humanizing Death, the show is normalizing him, making him less of an abstract concept and more of a character we can relate to. And that's a strange choice for a comedy show, but it works. We like Death when he appears. We're happy to see him. He's familiar. He's safe in a way. Because if Death is this guy, this schlubby, tired guy who's just doing his job, then death itself must not be that bad. It's just something that happens. Just the end of a shift. Just a transition. And maybe that's all it ever was. Maybe all the fear and mythology we've built up around death is just us being dramatic. Maybe it's simple. Maybe it's nothing. And maybe Family Guy, of all shows, stumbled into expressing that better than most serious dramas ever could. There are episodes where characters visit the afterlife, and the show's depiction of what comes after death is characteristically irreverent. Heaven exists. So does hell. They're both bureaucratic, both imperfect, both kind of disappointing. Heaven is boring. Hell is annoying, but not that bad. There's no transcendence, no ultimate meaning, just more existence in a different location with different rules. And that's either the most depressing vision of the afterlife imaginable or the most realistic, depending on your perspective. Family Guy doesn't believe in anything, so its afterlife doesn't offer redemption or punishment in any meaningful way. It's just another place, another level. You die and you go there, and you keep existing, and it's not that different from life, except you're dead. There's no growth, no transformation, no revelation. Just more of the same, forever. Which might be hell in itself. The idea that death doesn't end anything, doesn't change anything, doesn't offer escape or peace or meaning. You just are. Forever. in a slightly different form. That's horrifying in a quiet way. Not the fire and brimstone hell of religious tradition, but the existential hell of endless, meaningless existence. Family Guy probably didn't intend this to be horrifying. They probably thought it was funny. But it lands differently depending on when you're watching it and what you're thinking about, and whether you're afraid of death or afraid of not death or afraid of everything that comes after. Characters in Family Guy have gone to hell and come back, which again diminishes the stakes of death and damnation. If you can go to hell and then just leave, then hell isn't really hell. It's just a place you visit, an unpleasant vacation. And the same is true of heaven. Characters go there, hang out for a while, and then come back. The afterlife in Family Guy is porous. The boundaries between life and death are weak. You can cross over and cross back. And maybe that's commentary on religion, on how we've constructed these elaborate mythologies to explain death when the reality might be much more mundane, much less dramatic. Or maybe the show just likes the joke of Peter in heaven or Stewie in hell and doesn't care about the theological implications. That's more likely. But the effect is the same. Death becomes less significant, less final, less scary. It's just another state of being, another place your consciousness can exist. And if that's true, if death really is just a transition to another form of existence, then all the grief and fear we feel about it is wasted energy. We're afraid of nothing. We're mourning a change, not an ending. And that should be comforting, but somehow it's not. Somehow it makes everything feel more empty. If nothing ends, then nothing matters. If death isn't final, then life isn't precious. And we're left floating in this meaningless universe where nothing has weight and everything is temporary, but also eternal. And none of it means anything at all. There's a version of Family Guy that exists in your memory. From years ago, that's dead now. The show you remember watching when it first came back from cancellation, or when you were in high school, or college, or whenever you first discovered it. That version is gone. It's been replaced by the current version, which is similar, but not the same, which has the same characters, but different voices, different rhythms, different priorities. Every long-running show kills itself slowly, episode by episode, season by season, replacing what it was with what it's become. And we mourn that even as we keep watching. We say things like, the show used to be better, or it's not as funny as it used to be. And what we're really saying is that something died. The show we loved is dead. And we're watching its ghost, its reanimated corpse, shambling forward because nobody told it to stop. Family Guy has been on the air for over 2 decades. That's long enough for entire generations to grow up with it, to age out of it, to come back to it, and find it changed. The show has outlived its relevance multiple times and keeps going anyway. It's a zombie show. Dead, but still moving. Still making noise. Still taking up space. And maybe that's appropriate for a show about death. Maybe Family Guy is performing its own death in slow motion, showing us what it looks like when something refuses to die, even though it should, even though its time has passed, even though everyone knows it's over, but nobody has the courage or the authority to pull the plug. The show is kept alive by contracts and syndication deals and streaming revenue, and the fact that it's cheaper to keep producing it than to develop something new. It's alive for business reasons, not creative reasons. And that's a kind of death, too. Corporate death. The death of art by capitalism. The death of creative vision by committee. Family Guy is dead and doesn't know it, or knows it and doesn't care, or cares and can't do anything about it. The show is trapped in its own success, doomed to keep producing episodes long past the point where anyone involved has anything new to say. And every new episode is another shovelful of dirt on the grave of what the show used to be. But people still watch. You're here right now, listening to this, which means you care enough to spend 2 hours thinking about Family Guy deaths. And that means something. That means the show still has power, still occupies space in the culture, still matters to somebody. Even if it's just as background noise while you fall asleep. Even if it's just as comfort food, something familiar to put on when you don't want to think too hard. Family Guy exists now as a kind of cultural wallpaper, always there, always available, never demanding too much of you. And in that role, it's perfect. It's the show you put on when you want to turn your brain off, when you want to drift away, when you want something that won't challenge you or surprise you or make you feel too much. It's the show you fall asleep to, which is its own kind of death. The death of engagement. The death of attention. You're here, but you're not really here. You're listening, but you're fading. And the show just keeps talking, keeps narrating, keeps listing deaths and explaining lore, and filling the silence until you're gone. There are deaths in Family Guy that never happened, but feel like they did, because of how the show's memory works. How our memory works. You might swear you saw an episode where a certain character died. And maybe you did. Or maybe you're conflating multiple episodes. Or maybe you dreamed it. Or maybe someone told you about it and you incorporated it into your understanding of the show without ever actually seeing it. Memory is unreliable, especially memory of a show you've watched dozens or hundreds of episodes of over many years. The episodes blur together. The deaths pile up. You can't remember which ones were real, and which ones were simulations, and which ones were dreams, and which ones got reversed. And the show doesn't help because it doesn't care about continuity, doesn't care about keeping track, doesn't care if you remember correctly. Every episode exists in its own bubble. Every death is both permanent and temporary. And you're left with this vague sense that everyone has died at some point, in some episode, in some way. And you're probably right. Let's talk about Meg again, because her living death is the most sustained and disturbing element of the entire series. Meg is abused by everyone. Her family, her classmates, random strangers, the universe itself. And the show plays this as comedy. The joke is that Meg is worthless, that she deserves the abuse, that her suffering is inherently funny. And for a while, maybe it was. There's a tradition in comedy of the put-upon character, the person who exists to be the butt of jokes, the punching bag. But Family Guy has taken it further than most shows. They've made Meg's abuse so constant, so pervasive, so relentless, that it stops being funny and starts being uncomfortable. And then they keep going. They double down. They make it worse. And you're watching this happening, and you're either laughing because you've been conditioned to find it funny, or you're cringing because you recognize it as cruel, or you're not feeling anything because you've been numb to it. You've seen it so many times that it doesn't register anymore. And all three responses are valid, and all three responses are disturbing in their own way. There's an episode where the family literally tells Meg that she's the lightning rod for the family's dysfunction, that she absorbs all the negativity so the rest of them can function, and that she needs to accept this role for the good of the family. And Meg does. She accepts it. She sacrifices herself. She agrees to keep being abused so her family can be happy. And the episode frames this as a good thing, as noble, as Meg finally finding her purpose. But it's horrifying. It's the show saying that some people exist to suffer so others don't have to. That some people's pain is necessary for the system to work. That abuse is acceptable if it serves a function. And the show doesn't seem to recognize how dark this is. Or maybe it does, and that's the point. Maybe it's satire. Maybe it's commentary. But it's hard to tell, because the show keeps making Meg jokes after this episode. Keeps abusing her. Keeps treating her as worthless. So either the satire didn't work, or there was no satire, and the show really believes what it said. That Meg's suffering is necessary. That she deserves it. That she should accept it. And that's the most disturbing thing Family Guy has ever done. More disturbing than any death, any violence, any offensive joke. Because it's not a joke. It's a philosophy. It's a worldview. And it's poison. Meg should leave. She should run away, cut ties with her family, start a new life somewhere else where people treat her like a human being. And sometimes the show hints at this. Sometimes Meg has moments of clarity where she sees how toxic her family is, where she stands up for herself, where she takes a step toward freedom. And then the next episode she's back, taking abuse, accepting it, playing her role. Because the show needs her there. The show needs someone to dump on. And Meg is that person. She's trapped not by circumstances, but by narrative necessity. She can't leave because if she leaves, the show loses its punching bag. And the show would rather keep Meg miserable than lose its easy target. That's the real cruelty. Not the jokes themselves, but the fact that the show will never let her escape, never let her grow, never let her be happy. She's doomed to suffer forever because that's her function. And we accept this because we've been trained to accept it, because we've watched it for so long that it's normal now. Because questioning it would mean questioning the entire structure of the show. And it's easier to just laugh, or not laugh, and keep watching. But Meg isn't the only character trapped in a living death. Brian is too, in a different way. Brian used to be a writer. He had aspirations. He had dreams. He was working on a novel. He was going to be someone, and then he wasn't. The novel was never finished, or it was finished and it was terrible, or it was published and nobody cared. The show has done all three versions of this story at different times because continuity doesn't matter. But the result is the same. Brian failed. His dreams died. And he's stuck in Quahog, living with the Griffins, drinking too much, dating women he has nothing in common with, pretending he's happy when he's clearly not. Brian is a portrait of failed potential, of someone who could have been more but wasn't, of someone who's dying inside while everyone around him goes on with their lives. And the show knows this. The show uses this. Later episodes are increasingly cruel to Brian, calling out his hypocrisy, his pretentiousness, his failures. They strip away any dignity he had left. They expose him as a fraud, a loser, a joke. And it's brutal. It's character assassination. It's the show killing Brian slowly, not physically but spiritually, emotionally, stripping him down to nothing and then making us watch. And maybe Brian deserves it. Maybe he is a hypocrite and a fraud. Maybe he's been coasting on being the smartest person in a family of idiots for so long that he's forgotten he's not actually that smart, not actually that talented, not actually that special. Maybe the show is doing him a favor by forcing him to confront reality. Or maybe the show is just being cruel because cruelty is funny, and Brian is an easy target. And why not? It's hard to tell. The show doesn't make its intentions clear. It just does things, and you interpret them however you want. But the effect is the same. Brian is diminished. Season by season, episode by episode, he becomes less than he was. His death and resurrection in Life of Brian was supposed to be a reset, a chance for the character to come back better, for the show to acknowledge how much he means to the family and to the audience. But nothing changed. Brian came back and kept being the same failed writer, the same desperate drinker, the same pathetic middle-aged dog trying to recapture something he never really had in the first place. His resurrection was meaningless. He died and came back, and nothing mattered. He's still dying, just slower now. And we're watching it happen. Peter's father-in-law, Carter Pewterschmidt, is another character living in a kind of death. He's obscenely wealthy, powerful, connected, and also miserable. His relationship with his daughter is strained. His marriage is loveless. He's surrounded by people who want his money and nobody who actually cares about him. Carter represents the death of the soul that comes with extreme wealth, the isolation and paranoia an emptiness that money can't fill. And the show plays this for laughs, usually, but occasionally you get glimpses of real sadness underneath. Carter is lonely. Carter is old. Carter is running out of time, and he knows it, and there's nothing he can do about it. All his money, all his power, can't buy him more life. Can't buy him love. Can't buy him meaning. He's already dead in the ways that matter. He's just waiting for his body to catch up. And the show doesn't dwell on this because dwelling on things isn't what Family Guy does. But it's there. In the background. In the silences between jokes. In the way Carter's eyes look sometimes when he thinks nobody's watching. Lois's mother, Barbara Pewterschmidt, is actually dead. Died off screen between seasons. Mentioned in passing and never really mourned. Her death is treated as a non-event. A fact that happened somewhere else to someone we barely knew. And maybe that's realistic. Not everyone's death is dramatic. Not everyone gets a big send-off. Sometimes people just die, and the world keeps turning, and the people left behind keep living, and eventually they forget to be sad about it. Barbara's death is that kind of death. Quiet, unremarkable, easily forgotten. And in a show that treats death as spectacle, that makes deaths into events, and punchlines, and shocking moments, this quiet death is almost more disturbing. Because it suggests that some deaths don't matter. Some people die and nobody cares. And maybe that's true. Maybe that's more true than we want to admit. Maybe most deaths are like Barbara's. Off-screen, unnoticed, meaningless, except to the people who knew the person, and even then, only for a little while. There are minor characters who died so long ago that you've probably forgotten they ever existed. The evil monkey who lived in Chris's closet. He didn't die, exactly, but he disappeared, was written out, and then, when he came back, the show revealed he'd been suffering, living in fear, and he wasn't evil at all, just misunderstood. And then he left again, and hasn't been back since. He's effectively dead to the show now, a relic of an earlier era, a joke that doesn't work anymore. The show is full of these ghosts, these characters who used to appear regularly and now don't, who were part of the fabric of the show and then were quietly removed when they stopped being funny or useful. Greased up deaf guy, the Kool-Aid Man, Conway Twitty, who used to show up for minutes-long musical interludes that brought the episode to a complete halt. All dead now, in the sense that they don't appear anymore. They don't exist in the current version of the show. They're memories. They're history. They're part of what Family Guy used to be before it became what it is now. And what it is now is tired. The show is exhausted. You can feel it in the writing, in the performances, in the animation. Everyone involved has been doing this for too long. The voice actors have been playing these characters for over 20 years. Seth MacFarlane voices 3 of the main characters, and he's been doing it since 1999, and you can hear it in his voice sometimes. The weariness, the sense that he's going through the motions, that he's said these lines or lines like them 1,000 times before, and he'll say them 1,000 times more because that's the job. The writers have told every story they can think of. They've done every parody, every cutaway gag, every shocking moment. They're scraping the bottom of the barrel, and the barrel is empty. And they're still scraping because the show must go on. The animators are drawing the same characters in the same town, doing the same things, and trying to find new ways to make it interesting, new angles, new expressions. But there are only so many ways to draw Peter falling down. Only so many ways to animate a death. They've done them all, multiple times. And they're still doing it, still creating, still producing, even though the creative well is dry, even though there's nothing left to say. The show is a corpse, walking, and everyone involved knows it. And they keep doing it anyway, because what else is there? You could argue that Family Guy's entire run since its resurrection has been a meditation on death. The show died when Fox canceled it. It was gone. Finished. And then DVD sales were strong, and Adult Swim reruns got good ratings, and there was demand, and Fox brought it back. And it's been living on borrowed time ever since. The show knows it died. The characters joke about it occasionally, about being canceled, about coming back, about the network almost killing them again. There's a self-awareness there, a knowledge that they're survivors, that they shouldn't exist, but do, that they're living past their expiration date. And that colors everything. The show's nihilism, its darkness, its refusal to take anything seriously, all of it comes from the perspective of a show that's already died once. What does death matter when you've already experienced it and come back? What does anything matter when you're living in overtime, in extra innings, in a bonus round you never expected to see? Family Guy is post-death. It's operating in the space after the ending, and that gives it a strange freedom, a recklessness, a sense that there's nothing to lose because they've already lost everything and somehow won it back. Every episode that airs is a small miracle and a small tragedy. A miracle because the show is still here, still employing people, still entertaining some portion of the audience. A tragedy because it could have ended with dignity, could have gone out on a high note, could have been remembered fondly instead of lingering too long and becoming a punchline itself. Family Guy is the show that won't die, can't die. The network won't let it die because it makes money. The fans won't let it die because they keep watching. And the show itself can't die because it's already dead, already came back once, and proved that death is negotiable, that endings are optional, that nothing has to be permanent if you don't want it to be. And so it continues, episode after episode, season after season, year after year, long past the point where most shows would have ended, long past the point where it should have ended. It's the eternal show, the immortal show, the show that exists outside of time, outside of quality, outside of relevance. It just is, and it always will be, until suddenly it isn't. Until the day comes when the network finally pulls the plug and there's no resurrection this time, no second chance, just an ending. And that ending will come eventually. Everything ends. Even Family Guy. Even the show about nothing ending. About death being meaningless. About life going on no matter what. It will end. And when it does, it will have outlived most of its audience's interest. Most of its cultural relevance. Most of its reason for existing. It will die quietly. Unceremoniously. Like Barbara Pewterschmidt, and the world will keep turning. But until then, here we are, talking about every death in Family Guy, every character who died and stayed dead, who died and came back, who's dying slowly, who's already dead inside. Every moment of violence and loss and grief and shock value and dark comedy that the show has produced over 2 decades of continuous existence. And the list is long. The body count is high. Family Guy has killed more characters than most shows have characters. It's built an empire on death, on the joke of death, on the spectacle of death, on the meaninglessness of death. And we've watched it all. We've laughed at it, or been disturbed by it, or felt nothing because we've been numbed to it. We've participated in the show's desensitization project. Its mission to make death funny, to strip it of power, to transform it into content. And maybe that's good. Maybe we need art that makes death less scary, that shows us it's just part of life, just something that happens, nothing to be afraid of. Or maybe it's bad. Maybe we need to feel the weight of death, need to respect it, need to mourn it properly instead of turning it into a punchline. Maybe Family Guy has done us a disservice by making death into entertainment. Or maybe it's done us a favor by showing us that death is absurd, that life is absurd, that nothing matters except what we decide matters. The show doesn't have answers. It barely has questions. It just keeps going, keeps making jokes, keeps killing characters and bringing them back and killing them again. It's a machine that runs on death and produces laughter, or used to produce laughter, or produces something that resembles laughter if you're in the right mood. And you're here, listening to this, at whatever hour it is, in whatever state of consciousness you're in, drifting in and out, catching some details and missing others. And that's fine. That's the point. This isn't meant to be analyzed closely or remembered perfectly. It's meant to be ambient, background, something that fills the space while you transition from waking to sleeping, from consciousness to unconsciousness, from being here to being gone. And in that transition, in that liminal space, all these deaths feel appropriate. All these stories about endings feel right because you're experiencing your own small death, the death of the day, the death of awareness, the temporary death we all experience every night when we close our eyes and let go. Sleep is practice for death. That's what philosophers have said. Every night you die a little, let go of control, surrender to the darkness, trust that you'll come back in the morning. And usually you do. Usually you wake up and the world is still there, and you're still in it, and everything continues. But not always. Sometimes people go to sleep and don't wake up. Sometimes death comes quietly, in the night, without warning or drama or pain. Just a transition from sleeping to not being. And maybe that's the best way, the kindest way. To drift off while listening to something meaningless, something that doesn't demand anything of you, something that just talks and talks until you're gone. Family Guy is that something. This script is that something. 2 hours of lore and death and story and nonsense, designed to ease you into nothing, to make the transition gentle, to fill your mind with thoughts that don't matter so you can stop thinking and just be, and then stop being, at least for a while. Every death in Family Guy is a reminder that death is everywhere, in comedy and in drama, in fiction and in reality, in the foreground and the background, constant and unavoidable, and eventually coming for all of us. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight, you're just going to sleep. You're going to let go of the day and whatever happened in it. You're going to stop worrying about death, your own or anyone else's, and just rest. And the show will keep playing, keep talking, keep existing, whether you're conscious of it or not. It doesn't need you to be awake. It doesn't need you to be listening. It just needs to be, and you need to not be. And somewhere in the overlap between those two states, there's peace, there's quiet. There's the end of thinking and the beginning of nothing. And that's okay. That's good even. We need that. We need to not be sometimes. We need to let the world continue without us for a while. We need to practice death so we're not afraid when the real one comes. Family Guy will still be here tomorrow. The deaths will still have happened. The characters will still be trapped in their loops, dying and living and dying again, forever, or until the show finally ends, whichever comes first. But that's not your problem right now. Right now, your only job is to breathe, and listen, and let yourself drift. Let the words wash over you. Let the stories about death remind you that you're alive, for now, and that's enough. You don't have to do anything with that information. You don't have to make it mean anything. You just have to be, and then not be, and then be again in the morning. And the show will still be here. The deaths will still be here. The lore will still be here. Everything will wait for you. Everything will continue. Even after you're gone, even after you've stopped listening, the show plays on. The deaths keep happening. The world keeps turning. And maybe that's comforting. Maybe it's nice to know that things continue without you, that the universe doesn't need your attention to keep existing, that you can let go and everything will be fine. So let go. Close your eyes if they're not closed already. Stop trying to follow the thread. Stop trying to remember which deaths were real and which were fake. Stop trying to make sense of any of this. It doesn't make sense. It's not supposed to. It's just noise, just words, just sound to fill the silence. And the silence is coming. It's already here, underneath the words, waiting for you to notice it, waiting for you to sink into it. The silence where nothing happens and nothing matters and there's no death because there's no life. Just absence. Just rest. Just the long, comfortable dark that takes you nowhere and asks nothing of you. Family Guy has shown us every kind of death. Violent death. Quiet death. Funny death. Sad death. Meaningless death. Meaningful death. Temporary death. Permanent death. And in showing us all of it over and over, for 20 years, the show has stripped death of its power. It's just a thing that happens. Just a transition. Just the end of one episode and the beginning of the next, or the end of the season, or the end of the show, or the end of you. And the end is fine. The end is peaceful. The end is where you're heading right now. Tonight. In this moment. As the words continue and you stop hearing them. As your breathing slows and your thoughts scatter and you drift into that place where nothing exists except the sensation of letting go. Every death explained. Every death cataloged. Every death given its moment, its recognition, its place in the history of the show. And now you know them all. Or you knew them and forgot. Or you never really knew them because you weren't paying attention, and that's fine too. The deaths don't need you to remember them. They happened. They're recorded. They're part of the show's DNA, part of its history, part of what makes it what it is. A show about death pretending to be a comedy. A comedy about life pretending to be a show. A machine that produces episodes and makes money and employs people and fills time and means nothing and means everything depending on how you look at it. Family Guy is death. Family Guy is life. Family Guy is the space between, the transition, the moment when everything changes and nothing changes and you can't tell the difference anymore. And that's where you are now, in that space. In that moment. Transitioning from here to there, from wake to sleep, from being to not being. And it's okay. It's safe. The show is still playing. The deaths are still happening. And you're still here. For now. And then you won't be. And that's the whole point. That's what you came here for. To drift away while someone talks about cartoon deaths. To let go while Peter Griffin falls down one more time. To die. Just a little. Just for tonight. Just enough to rest. And in the morning, you'll come back. Like Brian. Like the chicken. Like the show itself. You'll resurrect. You'll continue. You'll be alive again. But not yet. Not now. Now you're gone. Now you're asleep. Now you're nowhere. And the show keeps playing, and the deaths keep coming, and everything continues without you, exactly as it should.